Many know about slavery, but few discuss paper genocide. We did not all come from Africa, and most of us have Aboriginal roots that were stripped away due to reclassification and miseducation. As a Native Black American and a member of the Muscogee Creek Nation, I understand the importance of tracing your lineage. If you want to learn how to trace your genealogy and apply for tribal citizenship, send an email to mike@keymediapro.com to schedule a consultation.
They don't want you to remember this. You not no slave, you indigenous. Fuck how they painted them Indians. You went to war with the French and the British, man. Quite frankly, you was kings, Merovingians. They took the women and men, made them prisoners, raised up the children to worship their images, set up a lab to the genes and they mixed them, and this shit get way deeper than your pigment. What?
You don't have to try to be something you're not.
Trying to be something I'm not? Trying to be proud of my African heritage? That's being something I'm not, then fine.
My grandmother was a full-blooded Iroquois.
I know all of that, Mama.
Then know this. I am alive because of the blood of a people who never scraped or begged or apologized for what they were. They asked only one thing of this world: to be allowed to be. It broke my heart when you changed your name. I gave you my grandmother's name, a woman who bore 9 children and educated them all, who held off 6 white men with a shotgun when they tried to drag one of her sons off to jail for not knowing his place. And you had to reach into an African dictionary to find a name that would make you proud.
My father was raised in the era when black niggas couldn't claim Native American. Making music would've thought I had help, but the Indians I know wanna be the chief they self.
All right. Let me get some fists and feathers in the chat if you can hear me loud, crisp, and clear. And we'll go ahead and get this party started. Today, I want to do a couple of things, okay? I want to give you guys a history of the Cherokee Nation, but I also want to teach you guys how to properly sift through history on your own. Because oftentimes history, especially American history, it's whitewashed. We receive a lot of miseducation. There's been policy put in place to hide and distance us from our Aboriginal heritage. So when we look at sources, historical accounts, we have to make sure that we know how to properly sift through the information. We have to learn how to discern the correct information. So guys, I've got kind of a cookie cutter documentary about the Cherokee Nation, but before we get into that, we've got to give you some historical context, because historical context is often lost upon us. So let's go ahead and get started. Smash the like button on the way in, hit the Cash App or the PayPal if you support the mission. Matter of fact, last stream we had a Cash App from Big Hank and Christopher. I'm sorry I missed that. I thank both of you guys for sliding something in the brown paper bag.
Brown paper bag. Brown paper bag.
Now let's go ahead and get on into the content. know, they always want to whitewash things. They always want to put the white passing Indians on the forefront. So let me pause the show real quick to show you some context as to the different phenotype of American Indians, especially the American Indians that have ancestral territory within the same area as the Cherokee Nation. I mean, I know that little slide we saw showed a bunch of white folks and maybe white folks mixed with some Indian, but let me give you some historical context and show you the photos they don't want to include. American Indians come in vast shades, different phenotypes, especially when you get to the East Coast. Most of them were straight up black folks. Most of them look just like you, just like me. Let's talk about it. There's an elder right there, rifle in her hand, feathers on her head. Come on. It wasn't just the white looking way. It wasn't just the Elizabeth Warrens. Let's talk about it. Historical context is key. Now we're getting to some colored folks. And we had some controversy within the Cherokee Nation because most people don't know, but Abraham Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation in 1863 did not free any black folks that were quote unquote slaves of the 5 civilized tribes. They were freed by the Treaty of 1866 that stipulated, since although they were classified as slaves, they were culturally fluent with the natives, they spoke the language, they intermarried, they intermixed families, had children. Well, because of that, they had to not only free them, but also give them equal citizenship and benefits of all tribal members. Some tribes said, okay, we will. Some tribes discriminated against those black Indians labeled freedmen, and the Cherokee Nation was a tribe that did discriminate against the freedmen until in recent years, the freedmen won a court case, and now they have full citizenship and the full benefits as bestowed onto them by way of the Treaty of 1866. What does it say here? What's it say? It was hard for the white slave owners to tell the difference between a black man and a Native American man before the white folks were mixed in with the Indians. Guys, that tells you that American Indians were heavily melanated and looked very similar to some of these African slaves. Matter of fact, Beatman says, are there 2 types of Native Americans, Asiatics that crossed the Bering Strait from Siberia, and the native blacks who are the ancestors of FBAs? Yes. As simply as you put it, yes. There were different ethnic groups of American Indians. The first largest ethnic group were the Anasazi, also known as the Amerindian, also known as the Negro people, were the oldest, original, and largest population. They said there was over 500 million of us, and we developed a vast civilization and a culture that are referred to as the Mound Builders or the Southeastern Woodland people. These mound builders built pyramids and vast architecture that still stands in the East Coast from Canada down to the Gulf of Mexico. Now, the second ethnic group in the Southwestern Plains, these are the immigrants. These are the Asians that came across the Bering Strait. These are the folks that look like this. These are the folks that look like this. It's a big difference between some Indians that look like that and Indians that look like this. Who did those colonists trying to form the 13 colonies? Who did they come in contact with on the East Coast? Black Indians. They didn't encounter the Asiatic Mongol natives that live in the plains until the final push towards west, the Oregon Trail. Then they had to pass through all those Navajo Pueblo tribes on their way to establish the West Coast. Just like you look at Africa, North African versus a South African, different people, different culture, different phenotype. Same thing with American Indians. You got Black Indians all in the Midwest, East Coast down south, and you got some Mongols over in the desert. Come on, let's talk about it. The natives only look like this present day. Even my tribe. If I went to the reservation right now, I see a bunch of white folks that look like this. White folks playing cowboys and Indians. Why? Because maybe they do have some native heritage, but it got washed away with all that white intermixing, with all that white intermarriage. Check out the movie Tears of the Flower Moon or something like that. I mean, the white folks did a crazy, devious number on assimilating and getting control of the tribes. And this is a similar fight that Black folks are facing in multiple Native American tribes. The Treaty of 1866 said the freedmen get full citizenship, full benefits. Some of the tribes said yes, and then the Cherokee tribe in the 1980s kicked out the freedmen. Well, the freedmen went to court and won, and starting in 2007, the freedmen got all their rights and their citizenship back. My tribe, the Muscogee Creek Nation, did the same exact thing. From 1866 until 1970, the Black folks, the freedmen, can be a part of the tribe. 1970, the Creek Nation comes out with a new constitution, kicks out all the Black Indians, and now to this day, the freedmen are going to Congress and fighting in court to get their citizenship back. So historical context is very key. And when we talk about freedmen, not all freedmen were slaves. Some of these tribes that they will tell you had slaves did not have slaves at all. The white folks just labeled them as slaves because they couldn't believe that Black folks could be living side by side with Indians. I mean, the truth is stranger than fiction. Hey, and I ain't even gonna hold you. Having Aboriginal heritage my damn self, I can only stand that music for so long. Okay, I'm just gonna go ahead and play the rest of the video on mute. Okay, I just it sounds cool for a minute, but after listening to it 5 minutes straight, I'm like, okay, I got it. Great pain, great sorrow. And this part is interesting because it does talk about how even though the Cherokee Nation has a checkered past with its Black members, during the civil rights struggle, there was a lot of camaraderie. And you know what? I want to make sure that this is still a pleasant viewing experience for you all, even though I personally don't necessarily want to listen to that tribal music any longer. So let me see if we can find a happy medium. Let me see if we can get some different tunes. Here we go. Here we go. Here's something pleasant for the ear. You know, a little FBA flavor.
Stay up all night, gotta work now. Make up my mind and it turns around. Say that I'm fine till I burn out. Thinking this money sounded so nice. Ambush here written in the strobe lights. Pay anything for the high price. This life feels like the sunny water. Wet my lips, but the sun's stronger. Pour it out, if I'm being honest. It's just not everything you promised. Running out, drying out, what did you say? What did you say when I told you? Maybe this wrist wasn't gold-proof. Packing my bags like it's all true.
All right, and ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, again, before we get to the main documentary film, I want to provide you guys with some historical context because there's been a lot of miseducation, there's been a lot of whitewashing of history. But this next thing that I'm going to make sure to highlight is of dear and dire importance, because what you're going to notice is they really want to try to drive into our brain that the freedmen were slaves, that the freedmen were African slaves. Not all freedmen were slaves. A lot of tribes had black folks that lived freely with them. There's a lot of black Americans that descend from black Indians that had no African admixture. And there's some of us who do descend from African slaves that then mixed in with Native Americans. And that's how we got our Native American admixture. So it's very nuanced. But listen here how they just try to drive home slave, descendant of slave, freedmen are slave, freedmen descendant slaves, freedmen slave, descendant fresh slave, slave. They just keep trying to drive that point. And it's for it's for malicious intent, to be frank.
The descendants of slaves once owned by members of the Cherokee Nation are getting their tribal citizenship back.
Wait a minute. These were black members of the Cherokee Nation. Why not just call them the black members of the Cherokee Nation? Why not just call them members of the Cherokee Nation? Why do you have to preface it with the descendants of slaves of the Cherokee Nation? Guys, peep the wordplay.
The descendants of slaves once owned by members of the Cherokee Nation are getting their tribal citizenship back. One America's Andy McCoven has the story.
The descendants of former slaves owned by the Cherokee Nation are rejoicing. This comes after a judge ruled in their favor on Thursday in a lawsuit.
Guys, this is a psyops. This is a psyops. Ain't that a tongue twister? Wouldn't it be easier to just call them black Indians, black Cherokee natives, native black Americans? But they have to preface it with oh, I'm a pimp named Slickback. And you have to say the whole thing like a Tribe Called Quest, right? Instead of just calling them native black Americans, they're descendants of slaves held by Cherokee Indians. Right, guys? Repeat that. Every time they talk about them, they're going to refer to them as descendants of slaves held by Cherokee Indians. Watch the psyops.
The descendants of slaves once owned by members of the Cherokee Nation are getting their tribal citizenship back. One America's Andy McCoven has the story.
The descendants of former slaves owned by the Cherokee Nation are rejoicing. This comes after a judge ruled in their favor on Thursday in a lawsuit that stretches back to 2003.
This is validation of who we are. We do have our rights to citizenship through the treaty, and that the U.S. government hasn't passed a law to take it away. This is what we wanted, yes.
As a part of the treaty with the U.S. government in 1866, the Cherokee Nation granted tribal citizenship to their emancipated slaves.
This was their form of reparations, tribal citizenship and all the benefits thereout. So when we talk about reparations modern day, and when we talk about the true history of Black Americans, some of you guys may have a reparations package waiting for you in way of tribal citizenship. I can tell you firsthand, there's real tangibles to being a member of a federally recognized tribe. I've personally received over $40,000 cash money since I've been a member of the Muscogee Creek Nation since 2021. There's a lot of benefits from healthcare to dental to housing, down payment assistance, school clothes for the kids, and everything in between. So let's take a look into our family heritage and see what we find.
Name is Javaris Johnson. I work in the oil and gas industry as a truck driver. I recently just did a consultation for my genealogy with Mike at Key Media Pro. It was awesome. A lot of great information. A lot of stuff I'm going to have to go back and digest because it was so much information, man. And it really helped me to get on the path to enrolling with my tribe and learning everything, man. And it's just a great and awesome experience. I encourage you guys, if you're curious, to go out, do your family tree, and connect with your ancestry.
I think it was very informative, very educational, very knowledgeable because you touched on some things that I was aware of, but I wasn't aware in detail. So it kind of gives like an insight to some of the things that are going on today from history. So I think it's very important to learn your genealogy. And I thank you for the information. You're showing us how to navigate through the system. It's worth 75 or maybe a little bit more to me.
This group of people became known as the Cherokee Freedmen. But beginning in the 1980s, tribal members began to question the legitimacy of the Freedmen's membership, and in 2007, Cherokee members voted to strip the membership of more than 2,500 Freedmen, defining tribal membership only by blood. Descendants of the Freedmen argued the treaty gave them all the rights of native Cherokees. An attorney for the Cherokee Nation said the group does not plan to appeal the decision and has begun processing citizenship applications for Freedmen descendants.
It means, for one thing, that the true history of the Cherokee Nation and the Freedmen, it will be there. And the Freedmen children, it will be easier for them to learn about their history, their culture, their tribal language as members of the tribe.
Eddie McCoven, One America News.
Let's talk about it, y'all. Historical context. Before we even get into the cookie cutter, the history of the Cherokee tribe documentary, I'm telling you, it's going to be whitewashed. It's going to have a little bit of misinfo. So I got to give you some historical context. They say the 5 civilized tribes had slaves, right? The 5 civilized tribes had slaves. Whenever I mention it to my genealogy clients or to the public at large, I always say they're quote unquote slaves, because what we'll find is that many of these 5 civilized tribes didn't have slaves at all, but the white folks still put that on record. It's like, imagine you are a pharmacist and you work for Rite Aid, and you're a pharmacist and you know that your task, you know that you're a pharmacist, but on paper somewhere on a document, you're listed as a slave. So now people, when they see the paper document, they think, damn, you're a slave. You're getting dogged, you're getting beat, but no, you're a pharmacist. So, and I know that was kind of a rudimentary example, but I say that to say this: there was free black folks a part of these tribes, and the racist white folks came by and just said, no, we're going to write you down as a slave. Oh, you're Indian? Nah, you black. You're a slave. Let's take a look at the Seminole Nation and the quote unquote slaves that the Seminoles had.
A close relationship developed between Seminoles and blacks on this prairie. Some white observers mistakenly assumed the blacks were slaves to the Seminoles.
Did you catch that? White observers mistakenly thought that the blacks were slaves of the Seminoles. To this day, you've got people that I meet with during these genealogy consultations, and we find their ancestors on the Dawes roll listed as a Seminole freedman. So they think, damn, Mike, My ancestor was a slave of the Seminole Indians. No, the Seminoles had no slaves. Matter of fact, there was something called the Seminole Wars where they went to war with Andrew Jackson. It was a bloody war because slave captors kept trying to steal the black tribal members of the Seminole Nation and send them to plantations. So the Seminoles fought a war against the U.S. government. But they're going to tell us that the Seminoles had slaves when in reality they're going to war to fight to protect their black tribal members.
It really was not a slave-master relationship. It was more a free existence. They intermarried. The children were accepted in the tribes quite easily, and they had a common interest in wanting to hold that land where they were living freely. They had acquired big herds of cattle themselves. They had nice fields and homes.
Come on, y'all. Come on. If I can provide you with such historical context in 20 minutes for free 99, imagine what kind of information we get into during the paid consultations that I do. But guys, historical context is key. If you take away nothing else, it's that historical context is absolutely crucial. So let's again get into a bit of more historical context before we take a look at our main feature presentation.
My name is Rosie Eleanor Brown Green. I was born 5 miles north of Lenape, behind a little church called Hickory Creek Church on the banks of a creek. Where I was born, it's right behind, our church is still there today. It's Little Flock Baptist Church, and it's on Road 8. My mother's name was Inola Rowe.
And shout out to T. T says, I'm still trying to figure out if we're supposed to be Indians and who are the Asian Indians. Make it make sense. I'll make it make sense for you quick, fast, and in a hurry. And this is the type of information that I cover during my genealogy consultations. I've got a whole segment on the different ethnic groups of the American Indians. Let me go ahead and pull up a map for you. Give me just a moment. We freestyling now, y'all. We freestyling. Let me put up good old trusty Google Maps. So check this out. Again, through miseducation and propaganda, they tell us that the American Indians look like this. No, these are the Asians that came across the Bering Strait. These are the first immigrants to America. Before the British, before the French, before the Spanish, these Mongols came from the Bering Strait. The Bering Strait is right here. Some say there was a land bridge, there was an ice age. Some people theorize that instead of walking across the Bering Strait, they actually just took ships from Asia over here. But either way, we know that they came across the Bering Strait from Asia and they settled here. The Asiatic natives that they always show in pop culture, that's a minority of the Native Americans that you only find in the Nevada desert, the Utah desert, the California desert, the Arizona desert. The vast majority of the Indians that the colonists and the white folks were dealing with in the 13 colonies are on the East Coast and down south. And all of this area is Black Indian territory. The Iroquois Confederacy, the Cherokee, the Seminole, the Choctaw, the Nottoway, the list goes on and on. Black Indians in the green, Asiatic immigrant natives over here in the desert. Mexico, Black Indians in the green, all in Central America, all in South America, Black Indians everywhere. The only place we find these Asiatic Mongols is right here in the desert. So for many of you guys confused because you're like, hey, I'm hearing all this information about Black folks being Indian, but I see all these images of Indians and they look Asian. There's different ethnic groups. Just like if you look at Africa, compare an East African to a West African, different phenotype, different culture, etc. Well, we had different ethnic groups. The Anasazi, the American Indian, the Negro people, we are the oldest and original. We were on the East Coast down south from the Gulf of Mexico to the Canada and all throughout Central and South America as well. We are known as the mound builders. We built pyramids that you can still go visit to this day. Matter of fact, most people don't realize the Philadelphia Museum of Art sits on a Native American pyramid. Another one that comes to mind is the Cahokia Mounds. Cahokia Mounds are right here. Cahokia Mounds are in St. Louis, Missouri, and these are ancient pyramid structures that Black Indians created. Cahokia Mounds. There's more pyramids in the Americas than the rest of the world combined. These pyramids in North America are older than the pyramids in Egypt by 7,000 to 8,000 years. This is how they would have originally looked like. Look at this. Look at this. Let me see if I can zoom in here. Look at this. Multi-tiered pyramid structure with houses. Look at this vast city surrounding the pyramid. We didn't live in no teepees. These Asiatic Mongols lived in teepees. These are the folks that lived in teepees. And if you Google Siberian teepees, this pops up. If you Google Native American teepees, this pops up. Siberian teepee, Native American teepee. What's the difference? Oh, there isn't any, because they come from the same culture of people. East Coast down south, nothing but Black Indians. And the Spanish speak very candidly about the Black Indians. It's very well documented. But hopefully I'm able to provide you guys a little bit more historical context. Let's go ahead and get back on with the show. And this one is going to be very, very interesting. Watch what this lady reveals about her heritage.
Brown. My father's name was Willie Brown. George Hammer Brown, Rachel Brown, Susan Brown, and Alexandra Brown came over the Trail of Tears from Georgia. My dad, he knowed all the herbs and stuff, and we would go pick poke salad when this poke salad was time, and we would do wild onions when wild onions time. But he knowed how to pick. He knowed wild lettuce and wild, all the wild stuff that grew. I would go with him. And it was a tea that you could make. It tastes good as the iced tea now. It grew in a bush. My dad would always gather it when it was green and hang it up. And then you could just crumble the leaves up, put them in hot water.
Did he ever use some of it for medicine?
Yeah, we did have 2 or 3 medicines. I had colic and stuff. They had a herb that you could boil and the baby could drink and put it in his bottle. And if he had bad upset stomach and stuff. And there was different kind of weed. I mean, not weeds, but plants. If they got like older people used them. We played games. My cousins lived across from me. And so it was 3 girls about my age. And so we always made up stuff, play house. And we even used to have picnics. When it rained real bad, down the ditches you could get crawdads. And we would get the crawdads, and we had our own kitchen outside, and we would boil them and cook them. But when I grew up, we didn't have running water. We hadn't got running water yet. So we had a well, and we had to walk to the well to get water. And we didn't have propane or natural gas. We burned wood. We always had a big garden. My dad, we didn't have a cellar or anything. He would dig this big hole, round, lined it with straw. He would put potatoes, different things, turnips, cabbage, and then he would cover back over straw, and we would have vegetables from on up until fall. I have picked the vegetables, I have hoed the vegetables, and I'd also have been planted. Like I had to set out tomatoes or cabbage or whatever that we were setting out. The ranchers, they didn't pay a lot of money.
Come on, y'all. If you're new to the broadcast, make sure to smash the like button, subscribe to the channel, hit the Cash App or the PayPal if you support the mission, and let me know, is there any Black Americans present right now in the chat who have yet to trace their family tree? Let me know. And if you've already traced your family tree, then let me know that as well, because I am being surprised that more and more folks, it seems like it's becoming a national discussion about genealogy and family heritage. So how many of you have done a deep dive? I know I didn't until 2021, okay? As much as I talk about genealogy and history, I wasn't always a member of the tribe. I didn't always have definitive proof that Black Americans descend from Aboriginals. So we all come into the information at our own time.
So you had to live But you mostly had to grow. We had always had hogs and chickens. We didn't have a car. We got around in a wagon. We drove to church a many day in a wagon. And then in the month of June, we always had what you call June meetings. And my mom would cook and he'd fill the back of the wagon up and we'd always go to church. And different churches would come. And later on, we had what you call in the urban, the streetcar. But we had to walk probably 3 miles to catch it, to go wherever we needed, like to Coffeeville or No Water. The kids in the country, like my husband and the friends, the other boys and my cousins, they used to ride it to Coffeeville every night on Saturday nights to look at the movies. And then they would drop them off back they'd still have to walk probably 2-3 miles to where they lived. In the fall, when it was cool, he always went and got rabbits or coons. And my mom used to grind the rabbits up and make rabbit sausage. My mom always made clothes like skirts and blouses. You know, you didn't have money to go buy stuff at the store like now. Verdigris River was east of where I was born at. And they had a ford down there called Riders Ford. They still call it Riders Ford. And I got baptized there. And we'd have picnics down there too. Yeah, we went fishing down there all the time. We fished a lot. Up here in Coffeeville on the corner, they had a restaurant, and everybody from the country went there. And you'd get hamburgers or whatever you wanted, you know. This man, they used to tease him. They said he could dip in his pot and get chili and stew and out of that one pot. Yeah.
And now here's something that you guys may have missed. Again, this is not just a look into the Cherokee Nation's history, but it's a look into properly seeking historical context and making sure that we read between the lines. As she talks about her heritage, some images flashed on the screen, and I think that there's one that we miss that we should take a look at. Check this out. This is her ancestor that she was mentioning, George B. Brown. This is an application for him to be a member of the tribe. It says George B. Brown, Abio Brown, and Terry Ross claimed that their mother was a full-blood Cherokee. And their fathers, they had different fathers, were Negroes and slaves. It doesn't say slaves. It doesn't say African slaves. It says Negroes and slaves. Well, guys, unless you have the historical context that I do, then you probably don't know that they were reclassifying Native Americans and lumping them into the same category as Africans and calling them Negroes since 1682. So when we're in the 1800s and these folks are applying for tribal citizenship and they say, hey, my father was a Negro, hey, my father was a Negro slave, that don't mean African, especially not when they've been lumping up and miscategorizing Native Americans as Negroes since the 1600s. Let's talk about it. Mother was a full-blood Cherokee. Fathers were Negroes and slaves. They claim that they were enrolled in 1851, and George Brown states that his mother was dead at the time, and that Miss Martin, widow, drew the money for them, that is for George, Juno, and Pori. It says here that George Brown is enrolled by the Dawes Commission on the roll of Cherokee by blood as half-blood. So he's on the Dawes roll, not as a freedman, but as a Cherokee by blood. Abby's name cannot be found in any of the Dawes Commission rolls under the name of Abby Brown. Perry Ross was enrolled by the Dawes Commission on the Freedman roll. Ding, 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 ding. This is what I want you guys to be privy to. Why was Perry Ross put on the Freedman roll? Is it because they were a slave of the tribe? Is it because they're an African slave of a Cherokee Indian? No, this is why. He gives his explanation of the fact that he was enrolled upon that roll, that when he was asked by the Dawes Commission on which role he wanted to go, he was scared. He was scared. He was scared. This person does not end up on the freedman role because they were a descendant of Indian slaves, because they're descendant of African slaves, but because he was scared. And what was he scared of? He was scared and said freedman because he was told that he would have trouble getting on the other role, even though his mother was a full-blood Indian. Damn. A lot of our folks couldn't even read or write back then. So you're telling me they were coercing and intimidating some of us to sign up on freedman roles when we were Indian by blood, not by association. So again, I give you that historical context so that you learn something further about the freedmen, about the fact that not all Indian tribes had slaves. Some tribes are classified as having black slaves, but really those black folks were free. But now let's go ahead and get into the main attraction. Okay, I told you guys I had a kind of cookie cutter documentary prepared on the history of the Cherokee Nation. And before we watch that, I needed you guys to get a little historical context. But now I think I've done my job properly, so we can go ahead and get into the whitewashed, watered down version of the tribal history of the Cherokee Indians. Y'all, let's get on into it.
The Cherokee are indigenous people of North America of Iroquoian lineage. There are many theories about the origin of the name Cherokee. It may have originally been derived from one of the tribes in the area, the Choctaw, or one of the Iroquois Five Nation tribes. It is also believed the name is derived from a Creek word, meaning people of different speech. The name which Cherokee originally used for themselves is Onionwea, meaning principal people. They speak an Iroquoian language and have a system of writing their own language developed in the 19th century by a famous and influential Cherokee leader called Sequoyah. Origins and ancestors. Anthropologists and historians have two main theories of Cherokee origins. One is that the Cherokee are relative latecomers to southern Appalachia, who may have migrated in late prehistoric times from northern areas around the Great Lakes. This has been the traditional territory of the Iroquois nations and other Iroquoian-speaking peoples. Other evidence indicates that the Cherokee migrated in prehistoric times from present-day Texas or northern Mexico to the Great Lakes area. They later migrated to the mountains and valleys of the southern part of the Appalachian chain. An ethnographer who lived with the tribe in the late 19th century, named James Mooney, recorded conversations with elders who recounted an oral tradition of the Cherokee people migrating south from the Great Lakes region in ancient times. By 1500 BC, a distinct Cherokee language had developed, and by the year 1000, the Cherokee were living a woodland lifestyle with unique cultural characteristics influenced by Mississippian traditions. Society. The Cherokee economy, like that of other Southeast tribes, was based primarily on agriculture, growing corn, beans, squash, sunflowers, and tobacco. Deer, bear, and elk were hunted with bows and arrows. Smaller game, such as raccoons, rabbits, squirrels, and turkeys, were hunted with long cane stem blowguns that propelled wood and feather darts. For fishing, hooks and lines, spears, and traps were used. Wild plant foods, including roots, greens, berries, and nuts, were also gathered for another source of nutrition. Clothing varied from season to season, but mainly consisted of woven cloth or deerskin.
And clever observation from the Manhattan Project. They said those are houses, not tents by the river. Exactly. The only tribes that lived in teepees were the Asiatic Mongols that live in the southwestern plains. We lived in houses. They called them long houses or shotgun houses. They had a fire pit in the middle, benches along the walls, bunk beds on each side. Fun fact, American Indians invented bunk beds, vertical living to save space. So yes, We lived in houses. We did not live in teepees roaming with the buffalo. That was them Asiatic Aboriginals.
The women wore dresses, the men wore pants, and everybody wore shoes. In winter, they wore a cloak made of woven cloth or fur. Hairstyles differed wildly from clan to clan. Some men were clean-shaven.
And I told you this was going to be a whitewashed version, so let me supplement those images with some more diverse images of Indians of the Cherokee tribe, okay? They come in many different shades, complexions, and slightly different phenotypes, okay? Not every Cherokee is one of these pale-faced looking Elizabeth Warren mixed with a little bit of something on us. I mean, come on, miss me with that. This is the equivalent of shooting the nose off the Sphinx, right? They went to the Egyptian hieroglyphs and lightened up the images of the Egyptians. Well, they do the same thing to us American Indians by showing us these artist drawings of some real light-skinned white passing folks. These aren't pictures, these are drawings.
Others wore beards. Some men shaved their heads. Others wore a topknot or ponytail. At the time of European contact, the Cherokee were a settled agricultural people living in approximately 200 fairly large villages and towns. The typical Cherokee town consisted of 30 to 60 houses and a large council house where general meetings were held and a sacred fire burned. Homes were usually wattle and daub, a circular framework interwoven with branches like an upside-down basket and plastered with mud. The entire structure was partially sunken into ground. Later, they turned to bark-roofed windowless log cabins with one door and a smoke hole in the roof. An important religious observance was the Busk, or Green Corn Festival, a first fruits and new fires celebration. The Cherokees are a matrilineal society. In the old days, they were divided into 7 matrilineal clans who lived in numerous permanent villages, typically placed along rivers and streams. Historically, women have primarily been the heads of households, owning the home and the land, farmers of the family's land, and mothers of the clans. As in many Native American cultures, Cherokee women are honored as life givers. As givers and nurturers of life via childbirth and the growing of plants, women are traditionally community leaders in Cherokee communities. The ancient Cherokees lived in an alternating state of war and peace, which called for a dual organization of tribal government, a white or peace organization and a red or war organization. Each town was governed by its 2 head chiefs, the white chief in peacetime and the red chief in war. An assemblage of important women was present at every war council. These served as counselors to the male leaders and also regulated the treatment of prisoners of war. Slavery was a component of Cherokee society prior to European colonization, as they frequently enslaved enemy captives taken during times of conflict with other indigenous tribes. By their oral tradition, the Cherokee viewed slavery as the result of an individual's failure in warfare and as a temporary status pending release or the slave's adoption into the tribe. During the colonial era, Carolinian settlers purchased Cherokees as slaves during the late 17th and early 18th century. They were also among the Native American people who sold native slaves to traders for use as laborers in Virginia and further north.
So come on, y'all. Context is key. When they say that Native Americans had slaves before the white man came, they were warring with each other and enslaving one another. These are stark differences between practices of slavery. American Indians go to war, somebody loses, they take them, capture them, place them in bondage until it's time for them to be released or assimilated into the tribe. They weren't taking these people and making them lifelong slaves, treating them subhuman like cattle, and breeding them and making their descendants slaves for life as well. So when the white folks want to say, oh, but the Indians was going to war holding slaves too, yeah, it's a big difference between Indian slavery and that shit that them Europeans get up to.
As the Cherokee began to adopt.
And yes, Tech Phoenix, you took the words out of my mouth. They were temporary prisoners of war. Come on, if the rule of law was abandoned right now and we were in our different modern day factions and clans, we would do the same thing. If my tribe is beefing with Tech's tribe and my tribe loses, well, goddamn it, Tech is going to have us tied up until they figure out what's going to happen. We either going to release these motherfuckers or they going to start rocking with us, okay? One of the other.
Up to some European American customs, they began to purchase enslaved African Americans to serve as workers on their farms or plantations. When the Cherokee were forcibly removed on the Trail of Tears, they took slaves with them and continued the trade in Indian Territory. European contact. Hernando de Soto and his men, Spanish explorers, led an expedition that is believed to have made the first European contact in 1540 with the Cherokees when they met on the Tennessee River. De Soto didn't spend much time with them, but he was hostile toward other natives. Although the Juan Pardo expedition revisited the area in 1566, and the Spanish made a fort and a small mining and smelting operation in the area until 1690, the Cherokees' location in the interior mountains kept them relatively isolated until after the settlement of Virginia in 1609. By 1629, English traders had worked their way west into the Appalachians and met the Cherokee. Their population in the 17th century was about 20,000 to 50,000. In 1673, English settlers came to Echota, the capital of the Cherokee Nation, to establish trade relations. European goods, such as brass kettles, textiles, scissors, knives, guns and ammunition, metal hatchets and hoes, and trinkets, were exchanged for native deerskins, beeswax, river cane baskets, and native slaves. Important changes began to occur within the Cherokee society as a result. Leadership shifted from medicine man to warrior, and warriors became hunters for profit. Cherokee relations with their neighbors were not.
And we got to pause that real quick. We got to pause that because when it says that De Soto, when it says the Spanish conquistador De Soto in the 1500s makes contact with the Cherokee Nation, again, this is a whitewashed documentary we're listening to. So they're leaving out the fact that when De Soto came over here, he described the Cherokee Indians as dark skin with long black hair. So again, when we look at the documentary we're watching and all the artist drawings are showing light-skinned, white-passing Indians, well, De Soto in the 1500s says the original Cherokees were dark-skinned. And dark skin is dark skin. You can't be like, oh, no, they were kind of light, dark skin. No, we all know what dark skin means. Let's stop the cap. So why in this documentary are they showing all these white-passing images of Cherokee Indians? I wonder.
Not always friendly. They raided Spanish settlements in Florida during 1673 and fought the coastal tribes of the Carolinas, but European trade and competition aggravated these rivalries and destabilized the region. By 1680, most of the tribes had gotten their first firearms, and the Cherokee had fortified their larger villages. Constant fighting with the Catawba tribe erupted in the east, followed by a growing friction with the Creek and Choctaw to the south. To the west, there.
And yes, that's my tribe. I'm a part of the Muscogee Creek Nation, and we actually went to war with the Cherokees. We went to war with the Cherokees during something called the Red Stick War, or it's also known as the Creek War. And it was a time where we were in conflict with the Cherokee Nation because the Cherokee were getting down with the Europeans. They was letting the Europeans come into our territory and doing trade with them and stuff. And the Creek Nation at that time were like, nah. So we went to war. It was called the Red Sticks because the upper creeks were known as the Red Sticks, and they were fighting U.S. territorial expansion. And the Cherokee Nation was allies of Andrew Jackson at the time. So my nation, the Creeks, went to war with the Cherokees because we were fighting U.S. expansion, and the Cherokees were fighting for the imperialist invaders. So you see how important it is understanding history.
there was a traditional hostility with the Chickasaw, also a British ally. To the north, the struggle between the French, Dutch, and English in the fur trade started the Beaver Wars. In 1730, the Cherokees made an alliance with the English by pledging their allegiance to the British Crown, King George II, and promising to trade only with the English. Other European powers were making alliances with Native American tribes as well, so the English needed special protection from their greatest rival, the French. A series of smallpox epidemics in the 18th century cut the Cherokees' population in half. Diseases carried by the Europeans were a big problem for Native American people, cutting greatly their numbers at the time. By that time, Cherokee territory had been firmly established in the Appalachian region of the southeastern United States, encompassing terrain that included parts of modern North and South Carolina, Tennessee, Kentucky, Alabama, and Georgia. However, through negotiations in 10 different treaties between 1721 and 1777 with Great Britain, large sections of land were given up by the Cherokee, dramatically reducing their territorial holdings. United States. From the earliest days of American independence, relations with Native American tribes had been a primary concern for national security. Two of the most influential individuals in shaping the Indian policy by the new United States government were Henry Knox, Secretary of War, as well as President George Washington. President Washington believed civilizing or assimilating the tribes to European ideals would provide the best path to lasting peace.
And this is what the United States enacted. Their policy, their motto, their mission and manifesto was kill the Indian, save the man. They started sending us to re-education camps, concentration camps, if you will. You remember that Roots, the Roots scene where he's like, I'm Kenta, no, you're Toby. They was doing that type of shit to us Black Aboriginals, trying to strip us from our American Indian heritage, reclassifying us throughout the years. That's why we go from Indian to Negro to mulatto to color to Black to African American. Why are we the only group in America that are reclassified every couple decades? Because they're hiding something, and they can't hide it for much longer. But ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, that's all I have for you this evening. I thank you guys for showing up and showing out as always. I will be live on Friday, and I will see you guys then. Take it easy, and I hope that you learned something new about slavery, but few discuss paper genocide. We did not all come from Africa, and most of us have Aboriginal roots that were stripped away due to reclassification and miseducation. As a Native Black American and a member of the Muscogee Creek Nation, I understand the importance of tracing your lineage. If you want to learn how to trace your genealogy and apply for tribal citizenship, send an email to mike@keymediapro.com to schedule a consultation.
They don't want you to remember this. You not no slave, you indigenous. Fuck how they painted them Indians. You went to war with the French and the British. Man, quite frankly, you was kings Merovingians. They took the women and men, made them prisoners, raised up the children to worship their images, set up a lab to the genes and they mixed them, and this shit get way deeper than your pigment. What?
You don't have to try to be something you're not.
Trying to be something I'm not? Trying to be proud of my African heritage? That's being something I'm not, then fine.
My grandmother was a full-blooded Iroquois.
I know all of that, Mama.
They don't know this. I am alive because of the blood of the people who never scraped or begged or apologized for what they were. They asked only one thing of this world, to be allowed to be. It broke my heart when you changed your name. I gave you my grandmother's name, a woman who bore 9 children and educated them all, who held off 6 white men with a shotgun when they tried to drag one of her sons off to jail for not knowing his place. And you had to reach into an African dictionary to find a name that would make you proud.